Hi, good afternoon. My name is Angie Cooper, and I'm the Chief Program Officer for Heartland Forward. Welcome to our second Connecting the Heartland Workshop series. For those of you that aren't familiar with Heartland Forward, we started in 2019 and we call ourselves a think and do tank. We have a mission to improve economic performance in the middle of the United States. And earlier this year, one of our main initiatives that we launched is a new campaign called Connecting the Heartland to High-Speed Internet Access. Our goal is essentially to accelerate progress and bridge gaps that prevent states and communities from realizing their goals of universal connectivity. This session is part of an ongoing series and workshop hosted and partnered with Land O'Lakes and the National Urban League. If you joined us a couple of months ago for our first workshop, you will know that we really try to be action-oriented, number one. We're trying to bring all levels of government and key stakeholders together in our states and our communities at the local level. And coming out of our last workshop, we heard from the chairwoman of the FCC as they were rolling out the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And coming out of this discussion, we partnered with a number of you at the state and local level to ensure that individual households that are eligible get the right information to sign up. And we're running radio ads, we have billboards, we have flyers, we've trained over 500 librarians across the Heartland to ensure that program is effective. And to, as I mentioned, we know affordability is a key barrier, and we're working with all of you to try to solve for that. So again, this is also our hope is for this to be a great discussion and action-oriented. Today's focus, though, is really on leveraging the record federal resources that will be coming down from the federal government to close high-speed internet adoption. We're appreciative for those of us that will be joining us today, specifically Governor Roy Cooper from North Carolina. We're going to hear from him about the leadership that he has taken in his state and opportunities in which many other state and stakeholder groups could also lead. We're also going to get some real-time updates from Washington. I know probably everyone joining us today stayed up late into the evening looking at the new language that has come down. So we'll hear from some of our experts and maybe get some advice of those individuals that have read every single word or are reading every single word in that legislation. And then we'll close our segment best around how to best think about digital inclusion and how do we share that across all of our states. So everyone is very familiar to Zoom, but just a few housekeeping things to think about before we get started with my conversation with the governor. This session is being recorded for purposes to be able to continue to share across the Heartland and across our country for those working on these issues. We want this to be interactive, so you can use your raise the hand function in Zoom to ask questions and we will call on you, or you can put questions in the chat box and we will be raising those questions throughout the session. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. And to get started, I'd like to welcome Governor Cooper. We are not related, and he told me he was not going to mention this, but I have learned his wife maybe attended the other university in the state of Oklahoma where I'm from, but not to be confused, Governor Cooper and I are not related, but we really appreciate him joining us today and we look forward to the discussion. So thank you, Governor.
Well, thank you, Angie, and delighted to be with you in Heartland today. And this all-star panel, I see Blair and a lot of great, knowledgeable people here today. And I'm looking forward to what they found out that may be in the new infrastructure bill when they've actually put it in text. So I look forward to hearing that. But glad to talk with you about this really important issue today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to get started, I mentioned we've all been, following over the weekend of what is coming out of Washington. So Would love to just kind of hear your thoughts, the take on the bill, and specifically the impact and sort of what you're planning for in North Carolina.
Well, first, we're excited that this infrastructure bill is coming together, and we know a large part of that is going to be additional funding for high-speed internet access around the country. Already, however, we are hoping to earmark American Rescue Plan funds to begin this exciting process of connecting people all across North Carolina. We have over 1 million people on the wrong side of the digital divide, and this funding can help us provide the infrastructure we need to connect people. But one of the things that has become clear to me is that this pandemic has put a spotlight on challenges that already existed. And the need for high-speed internet access has never been more acute. I think that this pandemic may have flung us 10 years into the future when you look at the need for remote education, for telemedicine, for small businesses to be able to access global markets. Where you live, or really how much money you make, shouldn't affect your access to high-speed internet. So we know that this is a real challenge for us, and we're excited about it. One of the things we want to make sure of is that people understand that this is not just a connectivity infrastructure problem. There are a lot of people who have internet access running right by their home, but they can't afford to connect, or they can't afford a device, or if they did, they don't know how to use it. So there are a lot of obstacles that we have to face in order to make sure that everyone gets connected. And it's one of the reasons why we established our Digital Equity and Literacy Office, because we know that our communities that are living on the margin, a lot of our communities of color, they are even at lower percentages of being connected than the rest of North Carolina. So I'm excited about this funding. I look forward to working with our legislature, with private, nonprofit, local governments. We have a real opportunity here to make this come together and to hit my mission for North Carolina, which is to have a North Carolina where people are better educated, where they're healthier and they have more money in their pockets, and have opportunities to live equitably and live lives of abundance. We're looking forward to that.
Governor, I mean, you are exactly right. And this is how the things you said is exactly sort of what we're focused on at Heartland Forward. I mentioned at the top of the meeting, our mission and vision is how do we change the narrative about the middle of the country and kickstart economic growth? And the getting people connected to high-speed internet is definitely an economic issue. We know it impacts the way people search for a job, train for a job, get a job. It impacts healthcare, education, business, and industry. And you referenced about a month ago, you announced the creation of a new office of digital equity and literacy. And when we think about kind of the 3A, or access, affordability, and adoptability, that adoptability piece is significant. And there's so much more that we should be doing in communities to ensure people have the education and resources needed to your point, to get connected where the infrastructure exists. So I'd love for you to share a little bit with us about kind of, I know you're just getting started, but the operations of the office and what you hope to accomplish here in the first few months.
Well, what's exciting is that we have a lot of buy-in from local governments already. We know that working together, we can make a real difference in this area, particularly now that we have the funds to do it. And so we're bringing in our locals. We're setting up innovative connectivity centers. We are really pushing our legislature that it's not just the infrastructure, but that we have to have funding for digital training, for literacy, for subscription prices, for devices, because that's what the equity is all about here, is not just the infrastructure, but making sure that everybody can participate here. And, we're getting great response on our suggestions on how we should implement the infrastructure with our legislature. We're not getting as great a response on the equity side, the subscription price side, those other things. So one of the things that I've urged members of Congress is to be more prescriptive in their funding mechanisms to state and local government on this issue. And the reason I say that, and that's funny coming from a governor who wants as much flexibility as possible, but a number of state legislatures across the country just are not going to invest these funds in those kinds of things. So I think with the federal legislation being more prescriptive in that arena, I'm hoping we can persuade them to do a lot of this. And for example, we have the $50 federal money that is there to supplement high-speed internet subscriptions for low-income families. And I think there are about 130,000 households. I may have that number wrong, and I'll stand to be corrected. I've got a good team who's online with me here. But one of the ways we've done that is I wrote letters to all of the providers and told them it was really important for them to take advantage of this federal program and to urge their own customers to sign up to make sure or to put the word out that they can get customers by signing up for this. So we hope by bringing this all together, by the Fed sending even more funds down here and being a little more prescriptive with it, that we can pull everybody together to make this an equitable distribution of high-speed internet all over North Carolina.
Yeah, I think that I've been in Washington for the past couple of days, and we're going to hear from our expert, Tom, from the National Governors Association, but hearing similar things from other state broadband offices, governors, is the fact that, the federal dollars coming down are great, but giving some real thought and accelerating also that kind of regulatory process. So you have the specific details needed on how the funds will be used. So you are of many, I think, states that they're asking that from the federal government going forward. We've talked a little bit, Governor, about affordability, and I just think I'd love to hear that you personally reached out to the providers to talk about being part of the EBB program and ensuring that everyone's communicating across the state to essentially get people connected. What are your thoughts? Are there things that your office and the legislature there in North Carolina are thinking about? EBB is a great program, both on the service and be able to get funds for a digital device. But what are your thoughts? It's not permanent. It's an emergency program. What should we all be thinking, all the stakeholders on this call, what should we be thinking about of how we could collectively come together on some permanent solutions around affordability?
Well, as you mentioned, we've encouraged providers to take part in this. And of course, the providers are very interested in how North Carolina is approaching all of this, as there will be competition for customers. There will be a lot of local public-private partnerships that compete for great grants that we've had a lot of success with in North Carolina. However, this is going to be on a much larger scale. So we want to see a bigger push by providers to get people signed up for this program. Now, I know that the program right now at least lasts until the money runs out. So what we need to do is to be ready as a state to have funding ready to supplement that. Now, obviously, I will be encouraging the feds to extend this program because we think it's making a difference out there, getting people connected who wouldn't otherwise be connected. But even if it's not, we need state funding to help us with training, to help us with devices. There are a lot of people out there who can maximize their use of high-speed internet. We got some very innovative people in North Carolina who are sometimes making things do with with string and baling wire. I'll give you an example. Dr. Karen Smith in Hope County had been experimenting with telemedicine with her substance use disorder patients. The opioid crisis we know is hit across the country, but she was having a lot of success in doing counseling sessions online with some of her patients. Well, the pandemic hit and people still needed medical care, but a lot of people were concerned about going into a doctor's office. Those doctors and nurses were concerned about people coming in as well. But in Hope County, which is a very poor rural county, a great county with a lot of amazing people that has a lot of potential, but it's one of these counties that a lot of people did not have high-speed internet access. She decided to set up an internet hotspot in her parking lot and distributed devices to her patients, and her patients drove up into the parking lot and she conducted telemedicine on the devices she had given her patients at the hotspot. Now, that needs to be done from home, but it just shows you how people were able to get medical treatment in the middle of a pandemic because of innovation in trying to make sure that more people had high-speed internet access. We're working hard to make sure that insurance companies actually reimburse providers for telemedicine. There's a lot that needs to be done. We've had to open our minds very quickly to adapt to the pandemic. And it's part of trying to find the good things out of bad things. This pandemic obviously has been deadly and it's hurt a lot of people, but finding the positive there is finding a way forward on high-speed internet access, affordable housing, expanding healthcare to more people in North Carolina. Those are things that we're going to find from this pandemic and turn it into a positive in North Carolina.
I absolutely agree. And I know a lot of people joining us today, government stakeholders want to do just that. And I think at Heartland Forward, we want to continue to share stories, just like the one you shared, because those things are happening in our communities and they make a real impact and can be replicated as we move forward. We just have a few more minutes left, Governor. And just as we kind of close, I'd love to know, when you visit and get started with your new Office of Digital Equity and Literacy and the work that you're doing, if you had a magic wand, what would you ask more from our federal government? What would you ask from the future public-private partnerships that could exist? What should we be thinking about going forward?
Well, first, obviously, money is what we want from the feds, and they have been responsive so far, and we want more of that. But we also want better data. The data that we have with the FCC right now really doesn't paint a real picture of who has access to high-speed internet. So we need better data from the feds so that we know how to tackle problems. On another issue altogether, on our vaccination database, we built our own database because we wanted to be able to see whether we had gotten behind in communities of color and communities that were underserved and always on the margins of healthcare anyway. And sure enough, we saw a lot of problems in vaccine distribution that we were able to tackle, and therefore we were able to close the gap on our Hispanic Latinx vaccinations, narrow the gap on vaccinations for our Black population. You can't tackle a problem unless you can see it. So we need this data from the FCC. I'm really proud of the office that we have in North Carolina. Excited Secretary Jim Weaver. I don't know if he's going to be on today, but we've got Jim and we've got Nate Denny, Jeremy Collins, and Kaya Edwards and Angie Bailey, and a lot of people in North Carolina who are working on this issue, trying to bring people together to meet this challenge. Our local governments need more flexibility. They are ready to participate in digital literacy and inclusion. And we want to build in equity on our digital expansion in North Carolina, just like we built in equity on vaccinations during the pandemic, because we don't want people to be left behind. We can be proud of ourselves laying fiber and putting towers where we need and all of that infrastructure. And we have to do that. But when we leave families behind that just simply can't afford to connect or don't know how to connect, then we hadn't done our job. So my magic wand is that we do get the funding that we need. We do get the information that we need so that we can see the problems, that we tackle them, and that we get North Carolina connected, and we get those million plus North Carolinians the connectivity they need, that North Carolina ranks as a top 5 state in the country in connectivity, and that we, particularly households with children, we want to get to as close to 100% as possible in those households. And we want to measure too how we're doing in our communities of color and in our communities where people are living on the margins. It's exciting to think about the possibilities, and it's exciting to have the funding that could help us do that. Just come together and do it the right way. And we appreciate this discussion very much today.
Well, Governor, so much appreciate your time and your leadership. Your office has been wonderful to work with, and so appreciate your staff as well. And we look forward. The next few days are going to be really important on that first thing that you said, if you had a magical wand, like continuing to get those resources. And then I think, that collaboration piece and what you're doing in North Carolina to ensure we're collaboratively working to get people connected and all communities are connected. So thank you for your time and your leadership, and we look forward to being in touch. There's many people, like I mentioned earlier on this call, that are working on these issues every single day. So we want to also be a resource to you. And with that, we're going to kick it to our next session. But Governor, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Angie.
It's great to see you. Well, what a great conversation with Governor Cooper. And the next session will be, I think, just as informative. I want to take a few minutes to introduce Blair Levin. Blair is a national thought leader on this issue. He has many years of working past with the FCC, overseeing the development of the National Broadband Plan, as well as a tremendous thought leader in the space and working with not just Heartland Forward, but other organizations, our partners, National Urban League. So Blair, we were sort of joking about how late we all stayed up and who's read line, the last line in the bill, but thanks for leading our next conversation, and I will kick it to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with everybody. Really appreciated hearing from Governor Cooper. And what we're going to do now is kind of drill down on some of the things that he said. We're going to look at this from a federal, state, and kind of local perspective. We're going to have with us Tom Curtin, who's the Program Director for Infrastructure for the National Governors Association. We have Amy Huffman, the Policy Director for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which is the largest alliance of people working on the ground on some of the issues the governor mentioned. And I should also mention, formerly worked with the state of North Carolina, and is one of the reasons why North Carolina is so far ahead until she was poached by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We're going to start with Joey Wenders, who is a senior policy advisor to Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. Both the senator and Joey have been longtime participants, very much at the center of these discussions. And as has been mentioned, late last night, a 2,700-word version of the infrastructure bill came out. There's Section F, which deals with broadband. We're going to talk about some of that. But Joey, I just want to start with you. As the governor already mentioned, we've already had the biggest investment by Congress into broadband. Earlier this year, we had $3 billion for the emergency broadband benefit, the subsidy for low-income people. $7 billion for the emergency connectivity fund, something I know you worked on both of these a lot. That's really more about the homework app in schools. $10 billion for capital projects coming out of Treasury. And then states are allowed to use part of the $350 billion that went to state and local governments. And then what happened last night was a draft of a bill that would put about 42 to 48, depending on how you calculate it, into new deployment efforts, with 42 going to the states, another 14 going to something similar to the EBB, that is to say low-income subsidies, and $2.5 billion, I think, going to Digital Equity Act uses, which are largely digital training and literacy efforts. This is a huge amount. I should make one note that as to the EBB, one change was it went from $50 a month to $30 a month, but it also increased. The 14 billion is huge. So, Joey, Congress is giving the states a huge amount of responsibility. What is your hope, and what was the congressional thinking behind giving the states that responsibility, and how do you hope they'll be able to administer the funds?
Sure. Great question, Blair. Thank you. And thank you for Heartland for having me on today. I mean, let me start by saying what the governor said a few minutes ago. The reason why Congress is doing this is because even though this problem has existed for many years, the pandemic has shined a spotlight on this digital divide that continues to persist around the country. And so that's why you're seeing these historic levels of funding being put into broadband by Congress today. So, what does Congress hope to achieve? I mean, they've clearly put a tremendous amount of resources. Either it's already been signed into law, or now it's been proposed last night, as Blair alluded, the 2,700-page bill that was filed last night. Both on deployment, and that's entrusting governors to build out in areas that are unserved and underserved, but also recognizing exactly what the governor talked about a few minutes ago, is that this is not just an access issue, it's an adoption problem. That there are many places where people have access, in fact, to broadband, but for many reasons, a number of reasons, they don't sign up, they don't adopt it. And so I think Congress in this package is recognizing the dual goals of access and adoption, and the need to close both gaps.
Well, let's drill down on that a little bit. In earlier legislation, there was the EBB, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and the Emergency Connectivity Fund.
That's right.
With the new bill, Congress appears to be wanting to create a permanent program. It talks about it being a kind of a permanent program, but the funding isn't permanent. Could you help people understand what's the difference between EBB and ECF? And also, what is Congress's thinking? I mean, it's a lot of money. My guess is it's somewhere between 2 to 4 years of funding this program. There's also a provision requiring the FCC to come up with a new plan for universal service. What's the overall congressional thinking here?
Sure. So EBB is a program to make the internet more affordable for low-income families around the country. ECF, the Educational Connections Fund, is specifically geared towards students who don't have internet at home. That's the homework gap that people have discussed for many, many years, but obviously was highlighted during the previous school year when kids were home due to COVID and the buildings were closed. Now, there's clearly an overlap. These are our complementary programs. Families that are eligible for EBB are also potentially eligible for ECF, but the idea is to really close that divide in terms of people that have access, but they can't afford to pay for it for whatever reason. Now, your question, Blair, about is this permanent? Is this not permanent? Permanency, nothing's necessarily permanent when it comes to Congress, but permanency refers to a dedicated funding stream. And that's what permanent ultimately means when we're talking about Congress. And so where does a permanent funding stream exist now? Well, a permanent funding stream exists with the Universal Service Program. That's the current E-rate program that connects schools and libraries. That's the Lifeline program. That's the Connect America Fund, which used to be called the High Cost Program. These programs are funded by a fee that's placed on people's cell phone bills. And so it continues year after year without congressional approval or congressional interference. Now, in order to make the EBB permanent or to make the ECF permanent or some successor program of them, you would need to reform the universal service funds, or you'd have to create some new dedicated funding stream that would essentially create an entitlement that would fund these in perpetuity. Now, Congress has done a lot in this long bill, and they've come together to do a lot of things in this long bill, but Congress hasn't taken that additional step of reforming the USF or creating a new entitlement. And so, like most things that we do in Congress, we have created something, we have funded it for however many years. Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? We'll see. And then obviously Congress is going to have to come back and solve the question of whether you make it permanent or whether you just continue to put more money in it through a yearly appropriation.
Great. Well, one other question before we move to Tom, because I know people will be wanting to know, you're an expert on the Senate. When is the Senate voting on this bill, and what are the odds of its passage?
Sure. I've worked on the Hill for 12 and a half years, and I've learned to never make predictions. However, the plan, our leader, Senator Schumer of New York, has said that this bill should move by the end of the week. Right now, we are entertaining bipartisan amendments on the floor. And the idea is to get this out of the Senate by the end of the week. And then we're on a dual track. Then next week, we take up a budget resolution, which sets the top line numbers, the parameters for passing what is being currently billed as a $3.5 trillion soft infrastructure plan that will be only supported by Democrats. And once these two things go to the House of Representatives, it is in Speaker Pelosi's hands, and she will have to have the very difficult task of figuring out how do you effectively move both. So we're talking post Labor Day for final passage, likely, of either or both of these packages.
Great. Well, thank you. And I know everyone appreciates that expertise because it's often confusing following these things. Tom, I want to turn to you. I've been reading various versions of this, and as I read everything that the state is both getting and is responsible for, I can't decide whether states should be looking at Congress as like the best Santa Claus ever or the worst 8th grade teacher handing out homework. I'm not necessarily going to ask you that question to characterize it, but what is the state's reaction to all the money that is flowing into broadband? Are they ready to do that? They have the offices and the resources necessary. What's the state view of this bill?
Well, yeah. Thanks, Blair. That's a great question. And, the NGA and the states have been very supportive of the bipartisan process and happy to see things moving forward. I thought we had a great perspective from Governor Cooper a little while ago, and we've been hearing from the states on this. They are very engaged. We have an active network of state broadband offices and governor's policy advisors that we meet with here at NGA on a monthly basis. And we have, great participation from that group. I think just about everybody in our membership is involved and engaged. And, I think what is moving forward is a recognition of the critical role that the states play in deploying these assets, deploying these funds and getting this, getting connected, getting affordability, getting adoption and getting access. And, Angie opened by talking about being action oriented. And that's where the states, that's where the action is in the state level. So, the states are very much looking closely at this and setting themselves up, I think, for success. The states have been establishing and building out broadband offices. I think the ability to use some of these funds to build out and manage those offices as they deepen those partnerships, I think is pretty critical. And we've seen a lot of success so far. So I think the framework is being built in there to get these funds deployed.
Are there any states in particular, and I know it's difficult, it's like asking a parent about a favorite child, but are there any states, we talk about North Carolina, and they were the first to establish an Office of Digital Equity, Are there any states where there are examples that you would like to point to that you think other states should look to in terms of how to roll this, both the networks and the adoption pieces out?
Absolutely, absolutely, tons. So what we've been doing at NGA, and if you take a look at our broader policies, you'll find that broadband is woven through just about everything. So it comes up on our infrastructure principles when we talk about building it out and integrating it into things like transportation and smart technology of tomorrow. Digital skills and building support for that workforce network and our workforce innovation network, putting those plans into action. Utilizing telemedicine. So we've actually had a series going of blog posts kind of on our website of broadband for all of these different issues. So broadband for workforce, broadband for telehealth and telemedicine, broadband for education, broadband for agriculture soon to come, I think is going to be a really good one to look at. So I mean, let's see, I've got a list here. When you look at K through 12 education, Governor Pritzker in Illinois utilized $80 million in grants to local jurisdictions to purchase devices for students. Governor Kay Ivey in Alabama utilized $100 million from the CARES Act to create the Alabama Broadband Connectivity ABC program for students. Governor Carney in Delaware with his Connect Delaware subsidy program for low-income students. We've been talking a lot about Governor Cooper's overall program and plan. I think he did a great job, putting together a big cohesive program. And then a lot of states actually, when you look towards the workforce side, have done a lot of things to facilitate, work-based learning and enhance workforce systems through COVID. So funding those and getting those up and running, I think is critical.
Great. I now want to turn to Amy, but I also want to say to the audience, we've got about 10 more minutes in the session, and if there are some questions you want to be asking, please let us know. But I certainly have a bunch of questions I'd like to ask our experts here. Amy, your organization has been one of the principal advocates for something that was called the Digital Equity Act, which really focuses on creating offices to teach digital skills, digital literacy, et cetera. How do you all feel about what is in this legislation, and what advice are you giving to your local affiliates for how to best utilize this new funding that's coming in?
Thank you, Blair, and thank you to Angie and the Connecting the Heartland team for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here, and really great to hear from Governor Cooper and what their plans are for the state. As a native North Carolinian, I, of course, am rooting for the state to be the most digitally equitable in the nation. So the Digital Equity Act, we're super excited about. Yes, we've been advocating for this for some time because it puts money in the hands of states to do planning, right, around digital equity. States have most states have a broadband office by this point. Most states have already thought about and planned for how they will invest federal funding or state funding in expanding broadband access through the state. But many states haven't had the capacity, the people, the funding, or the political will from above their broadband offices to do digital equity planning, to actually think holistically about what a digital equity plan would look like, how they would address all facets of the digital divide. And so the Digital Equity Act does that. It gives states the opportunity to do that through planning grants. There's 60 million set aside for planning grants for states. Then there's 1.44 billion set aside once they finish those plans for implementing those plans, which is great. That's a lot of money, right? That to enhance digital equity throughout the states. And then there's a 1.25 billion competitive grant program that will go to local organizations like our affiliates. We have over 600 affiliates across the country in 44 states. And those are the people on the ground doing digital inclusion work, the hard work of teaching digital skills, making people can get online through affordable offers, and helping people navigate all the different various steps that one takes to get online. So we're really excited. We're working with our affiliates to make sure they know this is coming so they can be prepared. So when the program applications open up, they are ready to apply. And we'll also be working with states on how to create these digital equity plans that are robust and well-rounded and holistic in nature.
That's great. We have a question from the audience. I'm not exactly sure who's best to answer it, though, Joey, you might be. The question is from John Marone: how will cybersecurity be incorporated into this effort? I might note that it is a huge issue, and actually President Biden has called together industry, I think on August 25th, for a roundtable on how to address these issues. It's not primarily in this legislation, I don't think, but I do think that some of the earlier money could be used by states to help improve the cybersecurity of their networks. But Joey or Tom, are you familiar with whether there's specific cybersecurity requirements or funds in the legislation?
I know that in the state and local funding, the $350 billion bucket at Treasury, cybersecurity is an eligible expense. There's a tremendous amount of leeway when it comes to that funding. In terms of the money, the 45 billion that's in the bill that was introduced or released very late last night, that I'm not sure about.
Yeah. Tom, any thoughts on that?
You know, I did see a summary of the overall package late last week that had a cyber resiliency section, and within the 2,700 pages that I have not gotten through since last night, I was focused on the broadband portion. So if that's still in there, I know that there were some cyber resiliency aspects of the overall package. It's definitely something that our network, that our membership is engaged in and involved in. You know, one thing you might want to take a look at and follow closely, related to kind of more the broadband and computer science education, is Governor Hutchinson's, our chair this year, Governor Hutchinson of Arkansas, has taken on computer science education as his primary agenda. So he'll be rolling out a big plan around that, focused on computer science education throughout the states. So
great. Also from the audience, a question really for you, Tom. What states have diverged from establishing a broadband office? And this person mentions Georgia. And are there other best practices from this divergent approach? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure about Georgia taking a divergent approach. I know that there's been different formats of the state broadband office. There's either, you know, an office that is set up within a separate office in itself, or within various cabinet agencies like departments of commerce or housing and community development. Each state has kind of approached it a little bit differently. The benefit of the network that we've convened and that we have an ongoing conversation with is that we have both governor's office policy advisors and the broadband office directors, boots on the ground folks who are out there administering funds and getting that connectivity. So, you know, I know Amy mentioned that support from above, and I couldn't be more critical, and it couldn't be more present. I think right now, we were tracking right at the beginning of the year. I think over 40 of our members mentioned broadband expansion in their state of the state addresses. We're also, I should mention this in the context of the bill that just passed, we have a great relationship with NTIA in the Department of Commerce. It's great to see that department being headed by a former governor, and in administering these funds. I think we couldn't have a better partner there. So excited about continuing that relationship as well.
Great. Amy, I know you're very familiar with state programs. Do you have any answer to that question?
Yeah, we just, to Tom's point, they can be located in any office. A lot of times you find in the economic development office. In North Carolina, ours was in the IT department. What we found, and I think what research has shown from Pew Charitable Trust, is that it really matters less about where it is and more about the leadership and whether the leadership is behind it and whether there's staff to it, whether it's well equipped enough and well resourced enough with staff needed to do the actual job.
Great. If I could ask who's ever doing tech to enlarge the font of the question, which just came up because I can't read it. I apologize if my eyes are not capable of that. But while that's happening, I'd like to ask all of the panelists, one of the most important questions is how the states develop their competitive grant program. And what the state and what Congress did, and it's really interesting. It previously funds for rural deployment were allocated through what was called a reverse auction at the FCC. Congress obviously had problems with that and said, we're just basically going to turn it over to the states, but they have to do it in a, quote, competitive fashion. Thoughts about best practices there? Again, Joey, let's start with you about what Congress was intending.
Well, I think some of it has to do with speed and some of it has to do with expertise, right? I think it's become clear as we've been thinking about, as we've been all obsessing about, I should say, broadband and internet connectivity since March of last year, as we've been enduring the pandemic, that, you know, broadband needs and broadband projects just don't come in the same shape and size everywhere. There are different demographics, there are different topography, there's different amounts of service providers or different types of service providers. And I think a lot of what Congress is doing here today, proposing and has already signed into law, recognizes that it is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that we're entrusting we are certainly entrusting governors and states to do the right thing, but at the same time, it is incumbent upon states to devote the resources, to devote the expertise, to ensure that they do get it right and they do spend well, or in the negative, not squander this truly historic opportunity to make sure everybody's connected.
Tom, Amy, quick thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's where those partnerships, really come into play. It's a really important that those partnerships between state and local, federal and state, the private entities, the service providers, and our anchor institutions as well. That's a big one out there in the community that is helping with adoption in particular. You see those anchor institutions getting out there, and those critical targeted investments in your schools and libraries and universities are paying big dividends when it comes to that adoption. So I think, the states, again, that's that sweet spot where you're right there, hearing from the locals in the local community, but, sophisticated enough, complex enough to get those funds out there. So,
Amy, final word to you.
Yeah, I would just say as states are building out their competitive grant programs specifically for access, increasing access, to build digital equity into those grant programs. Make sure that when providers apply for a grant, that they are required to offer a low-cost option or accept the emergency broadband benefit program, or the new program that's going to be put into law when this infrastructure bill passes, or that they partner with a local digital inclusion organization in exchange for accepting the grant.
Great. Well, we've run out of time. My apologies to the folks who sent in questions we didn't have time for, but great discussion. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Amy. And Angie, back to you.
Thank you, Blair. Appreciate you leading such a great discussion. Really good thoughts and advice and work being done by all of the panelists we just heard from. I'd now like to introduce Angela Siefer. Angela is the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Angela is definitely a pioneer in this field, and look forward to hearing from Angela and having a great conversation.
Thank you, Angie. I'm thrilled to be with you all today. I have a fabulous panel of rockstar digital inclusion practitioners. I'm currently on vacation with my family. This is the Airbnb. It's really sweet. If you need a recommendation, let me know. So we're going to run through a quick hello to all of our panelists. We have Daniel from, do we have everybody? Are they all here? Daniel, there he is. Daniel Anello is from Kids for Chicago. I'm a huge fan of the work that's gone on in Chicago. They have looked at it from all the different angles. So we're going to hear a lot from Daniel about what his organization has done with that work. We have Andrea Lindsay from PCs for People. PCs for People is the largest nonprofit refurbisher in the country. I keep saying that. If it ever becomes not true, somebody should tell me. Because we love what PCs for People has been able to do in so many different communities. Angela Bennett in my own state of Ohio, she's with DigitalC. And DigitalC is leading a lot of the digital inclusion efforts in Cleveland, and she will tell us about that. Lucas, I'm going to get your last name wrong.
I believe in you. Peter Zach.
Thank you, Peter Zach. I even practiced ahead of time. So Lucas is with Next Century Cities, which NDIA partners with often. We love Next Century Cities. They do incredible work all over the country. So we're going to hear from all of these fabulous people. We're going to try to keep it going pretty quick because we don't have a lot of time. And I believe we're starting with Daniel. So Daniel, tell us what's going on in Chicago.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for extending the invitation. This is not my Airbnb, this is my basement, so apologies. Glad to be here. I'm calling in from Chicago. I am the ED for an organization called Kids for Chicago, and we center our work on parents to ensure that they are directly engaged in policy on the education front. And some of you probably made the leap to say, why are you on this call around adoption and access for the internet? But everything that we do is direct engagement work first. And then based on what we hear from the families that we work with in community, we try to work with them to figure out how to go after system and policy. And when COVID hit and the pandemic kind of locked schools down in Chicago, that led to us reaching out to everyone in our network just to understand what was going on the ground for families. And frankly, what we heard was probably what everybody heard in most communities. This was an issue that was maybe number 10 on the list for people that moved very quickly to number 1. And as a result, we had conversations with parents about what were some of the potential solutions. We started having conversations with folks around the internet service providers with what are some of the potential solutions that they would present. And in a matter of about 6 to 7 weeks, we went from just trying to elevate the issue with the city to standing up what is now called Chicago Connected, which is a private-public partnership between internet service providers, community-based organizations, more than 35 of them here in Chicago, ourselves, the city, and the school district to build out what is now serving 65,000 families or 65,000 students, 45,000 family households with free internet access. The primary partners being Comcast, T-Mobile, and RCN here in our backyard. But it's hopefully we'll expand beyond that. It is Chicago Public Schools as a starting point, but we are now expanding to city colleges and some of the private schools in the city as well as beyond that. And it is a 4-year program with $50 million supporting it. About half of that came from philanthropy to get things started. And I have a lot of thoughts about the federal kind of law and some of the opportunities that are coming. I hope it's structured with flexibility to take into account programs like ours, because we stood it up and now it may not fit the mold that is being designed. But that is us in a nutshell. Our work is broad education parents work. It is very equity driven, but I'm happy to talk about this particular program itself as we kind of dig.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. Andrea, tell us about PCs for People and how many different communities you're now working in and how you're open to doing it some more.
Thanks. Yeah. So again, just really appreciate the opportunity and wonderful to be here with people doing such exciting work in so many different areas. As the new markets director with PCs for People, I have the pleasure of working with some of our more recent launches. So right now, Illinois is actually the first state where we have 2 kind of brick and mortar hubs, which we're so excited about. So we have one in Belleville, which I've been saying recently, it serves kind of like from the south up. And then we have one in Cook County, which serves from the north down, and we meet across the state. So that's been wonderful. We've also been working a little bit with Heartland Forward in terms of our Ohio operations, which are based in Cleveland, but definitely extending statewide at this point, I would say. We, of course, started in Minnesota. We also have an operation now in Maryland, in Colorado, and then in Kansas City. And so that's where we do our refurbishing and we recycle technology and get it back out into the community. We do also have an online platform where we are able to ship to 50 states in Puerto Rico. So we are happy to be working with folks kind of nationwide in that sense. And then also just partnering with so many great organizations doing that kind of on the ground work in their communities as well. So recently, I would say, through the pandemic, we certainly have seen an increase in demand for PCs, of course. We also try to kind of complement that with the other legs of the digital inclusion stool. So doing what we can to support internet connectivity, whether that's through fixed wireless, mobile hotspots, or connecting folks with affordable service in their area. And then of course on the education side of things as well. So demand increasing on all fronts, of course, as we all know. And then we have also been really thrilled to participate in the emergency broadband benefit program over the last few months. So lots of learnings there, and really appreciated all the information about what's coming next. So we'll see how we can adapt that as we continue.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. It's going to be really hard for me not to just ask you all like a zillion questions. So those who are also joining us, if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, I will try to get those in, and I will try not to ask my own questions because I have lots of them for everybody. Angela, let's move to you. Tell us about DigitalC and particularly your exciting news from recently.
Yes, thanks for having me here. Yes, we are super excited over here. So DigitalC's mission is to make Cleveland's digital future equitable. And we do that, through, access to affordable, high-speed internet to the home, because we want to make sure that we have the reliability and the sustainability, for the families that we serve. And here in Cleveland, we're currently in 6 out of the 34 neighborhoods. And then now with the generous grant from the Mandels and Meyer Foundations, we will be able to expand our footprint to cover the city of Cleveland, as well as serving East Cleveland as well, which is where I'm from. And also with that, we've been working on this empowerment plan. And so it's kind of the 3 A's, the access, affordability, and the adoption piece. Is what we're focused on. And adoption, not just to, focus on digital literacy skills, but we're really examining and measuring how do we impact 3 key areas for our families that we serve, and that's in health, education, and economics. So as we build up, this empowerment plan and partner with organizations that are already delivering the services. So we're not trying to duplicate anything, but really connect our families to the, tremendous work of existing organizations, but doing it so that we're much more intentional, and we're having warm handoffs, and we're serving as the advocates and the champions for our families, because we know that so often as we try to move our families, what we call from stabilize to strive to thrive, it's important to make sure we have those, warm handoffs to ensure that our families, are successful in those 3 key areas. So we are super excited here to be able to do this work.
Fabulous. Thank you, Angela. Lucas, tell us about Next Century Cities.
Yes. So Next Century Cities, we were founded in 2014. And since then, we've actually grown to a network of over 220 mayors, county executives, village presidents, and other municipal officials across the country. We are based here in Washington, D.C., but we like to say that all of our work is in every corner of the U.S. We come in alongside local governments to support them really in all of their broadband efforts. We tell people our mission is to make sure every household in the country has fast, affordable, and reliable broadband access. And we do that through a variety of programs where pre-COVID, we brought mayors and county executives and leaders together so they could network with each other and hear success stories and work through challenges together. And we've continued that through COVID-19 with a number of webinars with FCC commissioners and members of Congress and local leaders. And we just had our annual conference 2 weeks ago, where we really try to provide a platform to elevate local stories that otherwise wouldn't receive the national attention that they so rightly deserve. We also work alongside our local officials to really distill what's happening in Washington and in state capitals. We know, and we tell people time and time again, that while some of our members are large metropolises with full digital equity staffs and digital inclusion staffs, others are small towns and villages that the 3 elected officials might be the only full-time employees for the local government, or they could even be part-time employees. But we know that all of our local leaders are full-time neighbors and full-time community members. And so we do our best to make sure they understand what funding is coming down the line, how are these policy decisions impacting them, and how can we really get them in the room to be a part of the conversation from the beginning and not just somebody who co-signs onto a bill or supports a policy decision at the very end. So we do everything we can to elevate their voices and their stories and make sure they have every tool possible in their tool belt to sort of close the digital divide and address any adoption and equity gaps they might be facing in their community.
Super. Thank you, Lucas. Reminder to everyone, put your questions in the chat. Daniel, let's go back to the point you mentioned earlier, like, gee, I hope the feds actually set this up in a way that's useful to us. What would be useful to you?
I didn't mean to bait myself into a corner, but
Too late.
I should have known. I think for us, we have a program that is essentially a subsidized, it's paying for that entry level expense on behalf of families. And I know that with the EBB funding and kind of the gatekeeper ultimately is the internet service provider. So how do we kind of build a bridge in that regard? I mean, we're working with them in this partnership on the program, but we have 64,000 people, 45,000 households. So we'll say 45,000 subscriptions already established, and trying to figure out how do you use those dollars in a way that we're allowed to that extends the program. So that's just a very practical example, but I think that there's plenty of places where our partnership and the design of Chicago Connected is targeting community-based partners as an essential kind of ingredient to getting people to sign up for the internet. I think one of the things that we all know is that communities don't necessarily think that a free offer like, hey, we're gonna just give you free internet is a real thing. I mean, we get flyers like that in our mail and we throw them in the trash every day. And so one of the biggest challenges in Chicago right out of the gates that we recognize was just getting people to sign on to the service. And the best way to kind of break through that trust barrier was not to have the internet service provider marching out, but really have community-based partners leading that work. And so there is a construct in Chicago Connected that's about funding community-based partners to do that work. And the next stage of that is the digital literacy work. I think the one thing we don't do is the PC piece. We partner with organizations like PCs for People to hand out, the third prong, I guess, of this effort. But the digital literacy piece and the actual signups are totally dependent on community-based partners. And if there is any kind of restriction in the policy writing around that, that could preclude Chicago from being a participant in some of these new opportunities.
So an important clarification for everyone, Daniel, those community-based organizations that you partner with, you're giving them grant funds to do the work, right? You're not just like, hey, can you volunteer some time?
Yes, yeah, no, and I think the other piece that's been essential to the program in Chicago is that every single conversation that we're having, every committee, every design of policy involves families and parents who are participants within the program. So it's not just community-based partners. It's really trying to center on people who are directly impacted so that they're designing the system. So our digital equity work, all of that. But yes, we're compensating anyone who's in the room for their time. And community-based partners are a really important ingredient to the work here.
On that question, of that issue of stakeholders, Angela, I know DigitalC has been really intentional about who you engage as staff and how you make decisions with the community. Can you talk a bit about stakeholders and how you all think about engaging stakeholders?
Well, I wanted to chime in too with what Daniel said about compensating, everyone for their time, because it's something critical to that. It's showing our community members that we value them, and that we value their voices and their inputs, and that they are the experts of their experience. And so for us at DigitalC, we approach the communities that we serve, in the same way, even, recognizing our, term would be customers, but we call them our neighbors. We're situated, we're housed here in Cleveland, in one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in Cleveland is where we operate out of. And so we're here, when our families need to come in and pay their bills or when they have questions. So we engage with stakeholders, organization stakeholders, recognizing that everyone brings value, and, working with folks that are on the ground, actually doing the work so that lends us credibility when we're coming into the neighborhoods that we're serving. Also, as we hire our team and build out our team, we engage residents from the neighborhoods. For instance, Leslie, put in the box, and we're going to connect after this. Our college team, made up of brand ambassadors, are all from the neighborhoods. or from the high schools that we've served. So they have a direct connection. And so we're moving into spaces where they are literally the experts there. And then we're able to connect and they have credibility in the community. So that is, you know, when you talk about trust and respect, that is crucial.
Thank you. Andrea, during the first panel, there was discussion about what the role of the states is in all of this. And then in the knowledge that they're hopefully, like we're so close, right, to get that infrastructure package, and that the states would then be able to create digital equity plans, and then they would be able to have implementation money for that. So PCs for People has a unique relationship with some of the states. And I think that's also, it's a replicable model. Can you talk about the relationship with Illinois, with Ohio, and how you all developed those and how it works?
Yeah, thanks. And I think just big picture, I'll just echo what has been shared a little bit already about public-private partnerships, right? And collaboration across so many different sectors. I think Matt from the Illinois Office of Broadband might have put in the chat that he had to drop out. So I'm sorry we missed him. But Illinois did make this statewide computer equity network commitment, which again, he's kind of the expert to speak a little bit more to, but we're so excited to be a part of that involvement. And I think it really is just thinking about all these different aspects of adoption. So it's looking at infrastructure, it's looking at affordability, but it's also thinking about device access to connect to the internet. And then of course, the community engagement at so many different levels. And we have seen similar types of interest in Ohio, certainly, some really exciting commitment from the relevant offices and the governor and the deputy there as well. And I think the state and local governments can be involved in a variety of different ways. One that we continue to see being really productive is as conveners and connectors. So especially when we're talking about a statewide footprint, engaging those different types of community and organizations, engaging ISPs, engaging schools, libraries, local governments. We've seen that be really productive and beneficial.
Super, thank you, Andrea. Lucas, can you give us one or two examples of Next Century City members that you think are like really innovative, creative about their digital equity work?
Absolutely. The first one that comes to mind, we had a conversation a few weeks ago with the mayor of Chula Vista, California. And they recently, in spring of 2020, their city council unanimously, passed their new digital equity plan, which I'll put the link here in the chat in a second. But the mayor was really excited because they were able to sort of map out a whole of government. What does this look like? And sort of where in every single office in Chula Vista can they have a digital equity conversation, whether it's in public safety, in their partnerships with the school district, in their public housing offices. And they were really able to sort of map this out, which is something that we know is an ultimate goal for a lot of our members, is they're working to get to this point where they can have this huge bird's eye picture of, you know, what steps do we need to take? Who do we actually need to pay attention to? And Chula Vista did a phenomenal job of listening to the community, like everyone has said. They went into the community and they looked for the gaps. And something we really encourage people to do that they did was don't just listen to the people who are responding to you, but figure out why others aren't responding to you. And figure out, you know, those who aren't saying anything at all should have just as much weight sort of in the decision-making process. And we've seen that translate sort of across the country. Another member that I'm thinking about who is very early in their journey, but in East Liverpool, Ohio, they actually joined the NCC network this year. And the mayor came to us because he said, we're starting to see they're a town of about 10,000. And he said, we're seeing a lot of people leave for trade school, for vocational school, for college, but they're not coming back. And he said, our community is really dedicated to figuring out, you know, where are the equity gaps that people are now having to leave East Liverpool to find opportunity elsewhere. And so they're really focusing on that retention and creating a space where everyone can come back and, you know, stay in their hometown or come to East Liverpool for the first time and have the tools they need and the opportunities for success to grow that population and let East Liverpool be the thriving community that they know it can be.
Super, thank you, Lucas. We have a question in the chat from Alvaro asking, can you give us specific examples of how your outreach is being done to monolingual communities, especially the Latino and Asian communities? Daniel, this might be a question for you and a question for Angela.
Yeah, so I can drop this into the chat, just the link for Chicago Connected, but everything that we do, Alvaro, is translated into every language that we can possibly identify from Chicago Public Schools. So having them as a partner has been really critical to the outreach. But certainly, I think in Chicago, the most predominant languages are, Spanish, Polish, and Chinese. And so you'll find versions of every outreach in those languages. And the engagement teams that we put together are intentionally dual language at the very least. And so I know, there's a mom in our network, one of many, actually there's several parents from our network that are in the various conversations on Chicago Connected just by default, but she speaks Spanish. And so everything has to be dual language to ensure that she can be included in those conversations. And to Angela's point that she made earlier, she's an expert on her own experience. And as a recipient of the program, she's probably got better expertise on how well it's working than most everybody else in the room.
And I would say same here with DigitalC. We make sure that our literature, one, we connect with the local organizations that represent those communities, so that we can make sure that our literature and our approach are reflective. And we're very careful and intentional in how we do that. But from our literature to our customer experience agents, we have one that's bilingual, to our brand ambassador team that, we have a couple Hispanics, students that, also work for us as well. And so now, with the grant, we'll be able to move into the Asian community, and we will, again, adopt those same practices as we expand into the different communities.
Super. Thank you, Angela. We have some more questions that were submitted to us ahead of time. Digital literacy is a big question, right? So how do organizations help with providing digital literacy skills? Can we talk a little bit about wrapping in digital literacy to other programs and how sometimes it's standalone? Like, I think there's for folks just getting started into this field, that step back and look at digital inclusion, that we often think of it as the access to the internet, the access to devices, and the digital literacy. And we've seen a growth in the digital navigator programs where there's somebody to help figure all that out. But it still means that that digital inclusion ecosystem in that area is strong enough to be able to respond to all of those issues. And so for that digital literacy piece of it, how does that get wrapped in? So Andrea, PCs for People has some digital literacy that you do, but you think about it in terms of your devices and your connectivity. You all really think of it as all the different pieces. Can you talk to us a bit about that digital literacy, in person versus online?
Yeah, and I really liked the phrase you just used, I think, about the digital literacy ecosystem in each community, because our approach in all the different areas we work is really fundamentally collaborative. So we're always first looking to learn what is already happening in the area, and kind of take a little bit of that navigator role. So if we're connecting somebody with a computer, a device, and or the internet, we do that kind of initial education around what are your goals for this device? Are you able to connect the computer to the internet? Do you understand once you're online, what are the main things you want to do? And we find that works very well in person, often kind of a one-on-one actually as someone is getting those devices and getting that connectivity. But then we'll look to refer them for kind of ongoing education, and in communities where it seems like there's some need either for different trainings and classes, or for classes offered in a different format or a different location, we try to kind of plug in and fill some of those needs as well. But I think one example, we actually just had a really exciting merger with an organization called Kids Tech in Denver. So they have a history of doing really robust education and training. And so we'll be continuing to work with them on that, but also kind of seeing how they can continue to support nationally. And I think that's just one example of ways that we're always excited to partner with what's working in the local communities and help get folks referred.
Super, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on the digital literacy, Angela?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, our work has been, our primary core has been connecting families to the internet. But what we found was that, like you said, that's not enough. So what we have found ourselves doing is going in additionally with our high rises with our seniors, holding office hours and having digital days because, we'll bring in, ASC 3 for the formal digital literacy training, but we found that we needed something pre-digital literacy training to help our families, just one, connect to the internet, and then what we found too is being flexible and meeting them where they're at. So if someone, they came in and said, hey, I want to connect to DoorDash, how do you, do this? Well, once we, connect them and show them, the DoorDash, then we can take that next step and say, hey, did you know that you could use your EBT card to order Walmart or Amazon online, and start to show and connect them to those other resources, that they can, access. And then now, of course, with our empowerment, we'll be able to take that work, one step further, like with our families. We currently now go in and have these family trainings for the parents on how to use the internet, because we saw that one of the biggest challenges was that our kids and families didn't even know how to log on, where to log on, and that impacted their learning. So we could just get them over that initial hurdle. We know that, their academic achievement will, increase.
Super, thanks, Angela. During last summer, when Kids for Chicago was first launching Chicago Connected, they asked NDIA to update our startup manual. So I'll put the link for that in the chat, because the startup manual does have lots of digital literacy resources in it. So continued thanks to Daniel for helping us do that. Question for Lucas. We had received a question about digital literacy in rural areas. Like if we get connectivity in rural areas, is digital literacy necessary? I'm gonna broaden that question for you and ask you, is it necessary to address all the barriers, the devices, the digital literacy, or in rural areas, can you just focus on building it out?
I think that's a good question. And I think at the end of the day, digital literacy has to be a priority everywhere. But I think something we recognize with a lot of our members is a lot of these communities are coming to this conversation in very different places in the journey. We'll get on the phone call with someone who digital literacy and adoption are the biggest issue facing their community at the moment. But then we'll talk to smaller rural communities, whether it's a topography issue or a geography issue. They may simply look at us and say, we are relying on a temporary solution that is, doing the job in the moment, but we need something more long-term. And I apologize, my dog is not up and moving. She has a special skill for knowing when I'm talking and unmuted. But I think that that's an important conversation. And I think what we have to realize is digital literacy needs to be on everyone's priority list, whether you're rural, urban, dense, not dense, high income, low income, but we have to get there. And I think part of that is providing these local leaders with the tools they need to figure out where they are. Because a lot of times we'll have mayors or different officials come to us and say, we don't know what the problem is. We don't know if it's a literacy issue. We don't know if it's an access issue. We don't know what the assets are in the community. And I think giving them the funding, the capacity, the manpower, the resources to figure that out is the first step. And once they get through that, they can say, okay, we want to look at digital literacy this year, or we want to look at working with a private provider to build out access. But it's really that first question of where are we? That stumps a lot of officials, and giving them sort of the personal assistance of these are the questions you should be asking. And also here's the money to do a feasibility report or to do a study or a survey. I think both of those are instrumental to answering your question, Angela, of what do we prioritize and when?
Perfect. Thank you, Lucas. The upcoming infrastructure bill that I know I'm obsessed with, I imagine you all are also, right? Because it's going to impact all of us so much. That planning ahead piece of it is a big piece of it, right? That is the knowing what you have, knowing what you don't have, and then being able to say, hey, here's my missing gap. But if you don't know what that is, then how are you going to ask? And we can't all be Chicago having worked on this for over a year and be able to like, we know what we're doing, just give us more money, right? Other thoughts that you all have on that infrastructure bill coming in, what you think about what you're hearing about it, what you're concerned about?
I will say, just to start off, a point to reiterate, I'm excited about how much money is coming, because every dollar in the hand of a local community is a great dollar well spent. But I think that we have to remember that this is going to be a time that requires a lot of support for local communities and local officials who, like I said earlier, we barely have time to read through a 2,700 page, text from Congress. I promise you that a local mayor, whether they're full-time, part-time, or a local leader or a librarian, does not have the hours to sit down and read over 2,000 pages. So working with the local officials to know, this is what directly applies to you, and these are the steps you need to take to get access to that support would be the biggest thing for me.
Perfect. So I'm going to end with encouraging everyone to look at nextcenturycities.org, digitalinclusion.org. Both have resources to help you figure that out, to figure out how to either, if you are that local official, to figure out what to do with it. And if you're not, if you're more like one of the other three panelists here, how do you talk to your local elected officials? So NDIA has more on the community-based side, and Next Century Cities has more on the local government side. And we encourage you to look at all of those resources. Big thank you to our panelists. You all are amazing. You all are digital inclusion rock stars. And thank you for spending this time with us. I'm now going to pass it back to Angie.
Thanks, Angela. And I completely agree. What a great conversation of people doing real things on the ground, creating action, and really some good advice from what we heard of how those dollars will come through and what can be done with them. I also want to give an additional thank you to Governor Cooper and Blair Levin for leading such a great discussion with his panelists and the partnership with Land O'Lakes and the National Urban League. I mentioned at the top of this call that this is a series of workshops and discussions. We have received a lot of great feedback already just in the chat about what more we should be thinking about for the next workshop. So more to come, but we will focus the next workshop in the next few weeks around the adoptability piece. We'll obviously know a little bit more as it relates to the infrastructure package and what is officially passed, fingers crossed. And but in the meantime, you know how to get a hold of the Heartland Forward team. Please reach out. We want to share stories of people doing really good things and how we can collaborate and work together. So thanks everyone for their time, and we look forward to being in touch.